When It Snows on Halloween, written by A Clock Strikes 3. Halloween is a big deal in my town. Every house goes all out in a competition to see who can freak out the most kids. Luckily for us, they also compete to see who can give out the best candy. It's pretty great. And this year, my friends and I were finally old enough to go trick-or-treating alone. I spent all day getting ready with my friends Ashley and Sherry. I was going as a vampire, Ashley was a witch, and Sherry was a werewolf. I was just putting some fake blood around my mouth as a finishing touch when Ashley gasped. "What's wrong?" I asked without taking my eyes away from the mirror. "It's snowing!" Shit. Remember when I said Halloween was a big deal in my town? Yeah, well, snow on Halloween was an even bigger deal in my town. It only happened once in my lifetime, and that was 10 years ago when I was 2. So I don't remember it at all. But that didn't matter. Every year in the days leading up to Halloween, the grown-ups in town would drill it into our heads that snow on Halloween was a bad sign, and that if it snowed, we had to follow the rules. The rules were, if it snows on Halloween, every trick-or-treater wearing a mask will be asked to take it off before they get candy. If you are wearing a mask, you must take it off before taking any candy. If someone refuses to take off their mask, do not offer them candy and do not speak to them. We didn't know why behind the rules, but honestly, I didn't care. Sherry was the only one of us wearing a mask after all. "Sucks to be you, Sherry," I joked. "Hope that giant furball of a mask is easy to take on and off." "Yeah, Cher. Michaela and I will leave you behind if you aren't fast enough," Ashley said with a laugh. Very funny, guys." The good news was that we were staying at Ashley's house for the night, and her mom wasn't much of a nagger. So I figured she'd give us a quick reminder of the rules as we went out the door, and that would be it. My mom, on the other hand, was definitely a nagger. I could sense her phone call before my cell phone even rang. "Yes, Mom," I said as soon as I answered, not letting her get a word in. "Sherry's the only one wearing a mask, and she knows to take it off before getting candy. We won't talk to anyone who doesn't take their mask off. Blah, blah, blah. Love you and see you tomorrow." I hung up and giggled. Parents, am I right? After one last look at our costumes to make sure that they were perfect, we tumbled out the front door and into the snowy neighborhood. Our plan was to start at the house next door and work our way around the neighborhood as the night got darker. The inner streets had some seriously creepy-looking houses, and we wanted to hit those when it was good and dark out for maximum creep factor. "Do you think Josh and the guys will be out?" Ashley asked as we headed up the walkway to the nearest house. She had an obvious crush on Josh, but swore up and down that she didn't. No idea, Ash," I said as I rang the doorbell. "Trick or treat!" As the night went on, Sherry got pretty quick at ripping her mask off her head the second she was asked. I had to give it to her because she put it back on every time. I knew the mask completed the werewolf costume, but I probably would have left it off after the 4th or 5th house. Just before 9 o'clock, we hit the last house in the neighborhood. They were known to give out 2 full-size candy bars at the end of the night just to get rid of them. We ran past a group of kids who were just leaving and bounded up the steps. "Trick or treat!" What great costumes! Go ahead and take 2 bars if you'd like, the woman at the door said. But you two will have to take off your mask first. 2? I looked over at Sherry and saw another kid standing next to her. He was dressed as a scarecrow with a burlap sack over his head. The mouth was crookedly stitched on, and the eye holes were jaggedly cut. I shivered and looked away. Just some kid trying to get their last bit of candy like we were before the neighborhood shut off their porch lights and turned in for the night. I reached into the plastic pumpkin the woman was holding out and grabbed a Twix and a Milky Way. I looked over at Sherry, who was pulling off her mask. The scarecrow stood still next to her, his mask still on. Ashley grabbed her 2 bars and nudged Sherry. Come on, Wolfie, let's go. Sherry grabbed her candy and turned to the scarecrow. Hey kid, you gotta take your mask off if you want any candy. Sherry, you can't talk to him. I blurted out. What? She looked confused for a second before her mistake dawned on her. Oh shit, the rules! Sherry had moved to town 3 years ago, so the rules weren't as ingrained in her as they were in Ashley and I. We looked at the woman at the door nervously, hoping she would tell us the rules were just some silly made-up thing to make Halloween seem more scary. Instead, a look of pure terror crossed her face and she yanked the plastic pumpkin back to her chest. Run! She whispered before slamming her door shut and clicking the lock. Ashley and I grabbed Sherry and pulled her down the steps. We couldn't help but scream, though we didn't know why exactly the woman was so afraid. As we rounded the corner of the sidewalk, I turned to look behind us. I let out a shriek when my eyes met the jagged, empty eye holes of the scarecrow's mask. He was right behind us. Faster! I yelled, pulling on my friend's hands as I sprinted down the sidewalk toward Ashley's house. If we could just make it inside, we would be safe from whatever this thing chasing us was. Over the ragged gasp of our breath as we ran, I heard the sound of straw rubbing together as the scarecrow gained on us. Finally, I saw the illuminated front porch of Ashley's house. The 3 of us sprinted up the front steps faster than we'd ever dreamed of running in gym class. Ashley reached for the doorknob and froze. It was locked. She fumbled for her key as Sherry and I pounded on the door for her mom to open up, and I could hear the rustling sound of the scarecrow getting louder. Just when I thought my heart would beat straight out of my chest, Ashley swung the door open and pulled us inside. She slammed the door shut and locked it before turning the porch light off. As we collapsed on the floor, gasping for air, my eyes turned to the side table by the door. On it was a piece of notebook paper. I picked it up and read it quickly before crumpling it up. Your mom got called in for an emergency shift at the hospital, Ash. We're alone. Before Ashley could respond, there was a loud bang on the front door. The scarecrow was here, and it was mad. We have to barricade the door, I said, standing up and grabbing the side table. Ashley got up and grabbed the other side of the table so we could move it up against the door, while Sherry dragged over a chair from the living room. Something hit the window above us as the front doorknob rattled at the same time. Is there more than one of them? Sherry asked. No idea, but we need to get away from the door now, I said as I scrambled for the staircase. I figured being off the ground floor was safest. We ran into Ashley's room and started pushing her desk up against the door. I was pretty sure the scarecrow outside was no ordinary kid, and I didn't want to find out what would happen if it got to us. Guys, I'm so sorry, Sherry said through choked sobs. I didn't even think. I just thought it would be some dumb kid and I... It's okay, Cher, I said. We're gonna be okay. All three of us shrieked in unison as Ashley's bedroom window shook from the force of being hit. I turned to look and saw those jagged empty eye holes pressed up against the window. How did it get up here? Ashley screamed. I don't know, but we need to hide, I said. Follow me. I ran to the closet and ushered them inside, closing the door tight behind us. We huddled together behind Ashley's hanging clothes, our backs pressed far up against the closet wall as we could. The angry banging on Ashley's window continued, and I braced myself for the sound of the window shattering from the force of the scarecrow's blows. But instead, another bang sounded from the door to Ashley's bedroom. Next, another from the window, then the door, then the window. Sherry wept beside me while Ashley rocked back and forth, and I prayed to God that I wouldn't skip school again, and I would do all of my chores, that I'd never do anything bad again if He would just let us live. The assault on Ashley's window and door went on for hours, and I could hear the rustling of straw rubbing together from just outside the closet door. I was certain the door would open at any second, and the thing dressed as a scarecrow would drag us all down to hell with it. But finally, the banging stopped. We waited in silence for minutes, huddled together in fear. Silence. I pulled out my cell phone and checked the time. 12:05 a.m., November 1. We made it.
This took place a while ago. I was 13 and my family had just moved to a new town. A new friend of mine from school and I made plans to go trick-or-treating together. At the time, I remember thinking I was a bit too old to still be trick-or-treating. But who doesn't want free candy? My friend and I figured we still had 1 year of trick-or-treating left in us. Because we were 13 and lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, my parents thought it was fine for us to trick-or-treat together without adult supervision. Everything was going great, and we were having fun, getting some solid candy, etc. Then, we rang on one guy's doorbell. The porch light was on, and there was a pumpkin or two, so we figured the people in the house were likely to be handing out candy. A middle-aged man opened the door. At first, I was glad because he was dressed in costume, and happy to see my friend and me. So I felt we were in for some top-tier candy. I don't even remember what candy he handed out, but I do remember what happened next. He asked us to enter into his home, which is weird, but we were 13, so we really didn't think anything of it. Then he asked if he could take our photo. He said he always liked to take photos of the kids every Halloween because he loved seeing the costumes. On one of his walls were a bunch of pictures of different random unrelated children in Halloween costumes. At this point, even being a dumb 13-year-old, I was starting to get kinda creeped out. But I figured it was best not to upset the man and let him take the picture, and then we would leave. So he snaps the photo of us, and then he pulls out a clipboard with a sheet of paper on it, with a bunch of names written in childish handwriting. He says he likes the kids whose pics he snaps to sign their names so he can know who they are. At this point, we were both mega creeped out. We should have just run away, but we were too conditioned not to be rude. I decided to sign a fake name. He looked at the paper, looked back up at me, then down at the paper. Then he repeated the fake name I'd given him and nodded. Luckily after that, he didn't do anything and we were free to leave. but it definitely creeped us both out. At the time, I just thought he was an eccentric guy. But as an adult, looking back on the story, it seems much more sinister. I'm so glad nothing bad happened to us, and hope nothing bad happened to any other kids. Halloween, with all these costumed kids trick-or-treating in the dark and minimal parental supervision, could be a great opportunity for predators to get kids alone in their homes, with no one knowing the kids' whereabouts. Please stay safe out there, and have a happy Halloween.
The Halloween Decoration by u/tropical_rabbit. When I was 10 years old, I moved into a foster home. My deadbeat parents went out for cigarettes and beer one night, and then never came back. At least, that was the story I've told for the past 30 years. But now, I finally feel like I should tell the truth about what happened the night that they disappeared. My parents never wanted me. I was an unplanned mistake that they chose to keep for the welfare benefits. Growing up involved bruises, black eyes, the occasional cigarette burn, and daily verbal beatdowns. One day near Halloween, a flyer arrived in our mailbox about an arts and crafts fair at the nearby park. When I got the mail after walking home from school, I begged my mom to take me. She always let me put out our meager collection of decorations for the holidays, and I was excited by the prospect of finding something cool for Halloween at the fair. She said that it was just a stupid fair, but that I could go if it would make me shut up about it. She wouldn't give me any money though, because they couldn't afford it, although they had no problem buying cigarettes and beer all the time. But last time I brought that up, it resulted in a slap across the face. When the day of the fair arrived, I grabbed my rusted bike and rode to the park with a pocket full of change that I had saved from constantly checking payphone coin return slots. I took the shortcut through the woods and past the rusted car frame, littered with cigarette butts and beer bottles, where the cool high school kids hung out. The woods opened into a grassy field with a baseball diamond, playground, and a couple soccer fields. Cars filled with happy families drove into the dirt parking lot and headed to the various tables. I set my bike down against a tree and browsed the pictures, jewelry, and knickknacks displayed at the vendor tables. Everything was so much more than $1.55 that I held in my pocket. I started to cry as I left the last table, realizing that I was too poor to buy anything. Dejected, I headed back towards my bike with my head down, wanting to just keep pedaling as fast as I could to get as far away as I could. All of a sudden, I bumped into another table that I hadn't noticed before right beside my bike. "I'm sorry," I said as I wiped the tears from my eyes. "I didn't see you there." The old woman sitting at the table didn't say anything. She just waved her hand in front of the trinkets on the table. Her thinning gray hair was matted down on her blistered scalp, and her face was weathered and wrinkled. I looked at the items on the table, and they all appeared to be Halloween themed. There was a mummified corpse coming out of a tomb carved out of wood, a clay sculpture of a 3-headed wolf standing on its hind legs, holding and smiling a severed head, a girl with a long flowing dress and long red hair sitting atop a broken oblong skull, and various other items. These were so detailed and finely crafted that I was sure they were too expensive for me, so I said, "Thanks, but I don't have enough money," and turned around to leave. She started tapping her nails on the table to get my attention. I turned back around and she reached into a bag next to her, pulled out a new trinket, and slid it towards me. I asked how much it was and she shook her head no and pushed it closer to me. I reached into my pocket and tried to hand her what little money I had, but she just pushed my hand away and shook her head no again. After thanking her multiple times, I picked up my new decoration to get a better look at it. It was a small house with busted windows and a boarded-up door. On the back of the house was a small key. I turned the key until it wouldn't go any further and let go. It emitted a series of clicks as the door opened up, and a tall, thin figure wearing a tattered black suit with a top hat and leaning on a cane followed a track that I hadn't noticed at first. It moved slowly and jerkily until it stopped a little ways in front of the house. A long bony arm reached up and took the top hat off of its ugly disfigured face. The skin was hanging off its left cheek and the right side of its head was missing an eye. Its jaw hung down in a big open-mouth smile with long flat teeth, and it took a bow before going back inside the house. It was a little odd and creepy, but I was not one to turn down something free, so I held it carefully, grabbed my bike, and turned back to wave bye to the old lady. But she was already packing her things. She gave me a wave and a smile as I got on my bike and pedaled back home. I set my bike down in the grass and ran inside, excited to set up the new decoration in my room. My dad was slumped over in his chair with the Lions game on, and my mom was in the kitchen smoking her cigarettes and watching something on the free portable TV that they got for attending some sales seminar. I walked slowly by them, trying not to be heard, and went into my room, closing the door quietly behind me. I wound the key up again and set the decoration down on my dresser. Nothing happened. I wound it again, but still nothing. I guessed that it must have broken already, and I lie down to go to sleep. I was awoken by a clicking sound and looked up at my dresser. The door to the little house opened up, and the figure came out. It stopped outside the house and leaned on its cane, staring at me. The smile was gone from its face. Just then, my door opened and my dad stumbled in, yelling at me for not doing the dishes. He smacked me a few times and then stumbled out. I heard a light tapping noise coming from my dresser, and I wiped the tears out of my eyes to see the figure tapping its cane on the ground and staring out the door where my dad had gone. He then went back in the house, and the little door slammed shut. This happened a few times over the next week, with different reasons for my dad being mad, and once my mom, followed by various displays of anger from the figure. The night before Halloween was particularly bad. My mom and dad were both drunk and had friends over. They thought it would be funny to use me as their servant. I had to keep bringing them drinks, and they threw stuff at me whenever I took too long or accidentally spilled anything. Late in the night, my mom's ashtray filled up, so she reached over and put her cigarette out on my arm. I ran, crying, to my room while they laughed, and I noticed the figure had moved off the decoration and was standing on my dresser, slamming his cane down over and over. He then pointed his cane at my bed as if to tell me to go lie down. I climbed into bed and closed my eyes as the little figure watched over me. Somehow, I fell asleep quickly from the exhaustion and trauma of the day. A piercing scream coming from down the hall in my parents' room woke me up just after midnight. I quietly opened my door and leaned out to look into their room. The moonlight shone in through their windows, and I could see the tall, bony figure leaning over the top of the bed with his cane pushed down on my dad's chest. He had grown to about 7 feet tall, and his mouth was biting down on my dad's leg. His big flat teeth were grinding back and forth across the bone. Then, I heard a loud snap as its powerful jaws broke right through the bone. My mom and dad were both screaming as the figure's mouth moved further up my dad's leg and began grinding its teeth back and forth again. My dad tried to pull away, but the pain and the pressure of the cane must have been too much. My mom jumped out of bed and ran behind the monster. It forcefully swung the cane around, tripping her and knocking her into the wall. She crumpled into a heap on the floor, moaning in pain. My dad looked over at me and let out a weak cry for help. But I just stood there, unmoving, and watched the violent spectacle unfold before me. After a couple of minutes, one of my dad's legs was completely gone, and he looked to be passed out from the pain. My mom slowly started crawling toward me. The monster walked over and lifted his cane high above his head. He then brought it down with so much force that it went right through her leg, pinning her to the floor. The monster went back to work eating my dad's other leg, followed by his arms, torso, and lastly, his head. My mom listened to the mashing and grinding of the bones until there was a short moment of silence as the last of my dad was gobbled up. I felt nothing as I watched the monster walk over to my mom and bite each finger off one by one as she continued to scream. He then devoured her with a similar methodical process, and when he was finished, he walked over and stood in front of me, towering over me. His eye and empty socket felt like they were staring into my soul. He stayed there for a minute, and then removed his top hat and took a bow before walking out of the house. I cleaned up the floor, threw away the bedding, and called the police the next day with my story about them going out for cigarettes and beer and never coming back. I kept the house decoration without the figure and put it out every year, except for the last few years. These last couple of years have been rough for me. I was laid off, and I wasn't able to find work for a long time. I didn't mean to hit my son and yell at him so much. I promise, I am not like my father. I can be good again. You have to believe me. You see, I just left my son's room and the house was sitting on his dresser. As I was walking out the door, the familiar clicking noise caught my attention. The little door opened and the figure was back. He stopped just outside the little house and stared at me. He then began to grind his teeth back and forth. Halloween is almost here, and I promise I will be good.
Halloween's a little over a month away, so I decided to share something that happened to me. The following story happened when I was in middle school. My school had always had a Halloween party. Most schools have some event, I imagine. That particular Halloween, my friends and I decided to investigate the rumors of the haunted theater. Various people had claimed that it had a spirit in it. We figured that if there was someone there, it was only a student and wouldn't be anything special. Dressed in black, we snuck into the theater during the party, which was being held on the other side of the campus. We didn't want to be seen, seeing as we were expected to be at the party. We crept through the darkened hallways, jumping at any sound, not out of fear of the supernatural, but out of fear of the faculty. We hadn't brought flashlights to this, since any light might alert the faculty working late to our presence. We reached the central staircase dividing the high school from the middle school and descended further into the darkness. Each step we took sounded like an explosion to our ears. Upon reaching the bottom, we found ourselves swallowed by the darkness. We had been there so many times that it didn't exactly deter us, though it did unnerve us. We slowly crept towards the double door of the theater. We didn't want to trip over any randomly placed chairs or benches. I pushed on the handle of one of the doors, and to our surprise, it opened rather smoothly. I held it for my friends, and after the last had entered, I eased the door shut. Once it clicked, I was assured that no one had seen us enter. We felt around the stage of the theater. That's where most had suspected the spirit of being. Because I had been on ghost tours in the past, I brought a camera to take pictures. Once we were on stage, we surveyed our surroundings. Not that we could see much. "Dude, take a picture so we can get a glimpse of the stage," one of my friends suggested. None of us had been backstage, so at least having some brief light would be better than tripping and stumbling over chairs, blocks, costume racks, curtain strings, and so on. I pressed the power button on my camera. Nothing happened. "What are you waiting for, man?" another friend said. "1 sec," I replied. "It's not turning on." "Damn it, Jim," the first said. "Don't tell us that you forgot the batteries." "No, wait, there it goes," I said. The display lit my face up, ghostly white in the darkness. I began to aim the camera down the small backstage corridor. I checked the flash was on and took a picture. An eerie white flash illuminated the hall, and we got a good view of what was back there. I decided to check the picture. At the end of the corridor, I could have sworn I saw a black figure peeking out from the end of the wall that divided the stage from the corridor. It wasn't anything I could really go on, but somehow I knew it was there. It wasn't angry, it wasn't happy. It looked both afraid and curious about us. I could have told my friends, but they may not have listened. They slowly went down the hallway and I followed, not knowing what we might encounter. We reached the end of the hallway and were in the small room at the end of the stage. It was oddly cold, but we weren't surprised. The doors to the outside were on that side, and the cold October air could be creeping in. Again, I took a picture, and after the blinding light illuminated the room, I looked at the picture. I immediately dropped the camera when I saw it. On the picture was a face. It was a pale face, with long, straight black hair, looking kinda like a girl's, but it was quite distorted. Her face was elongated, and her mouth was open wide. Her face was translucent, and I could see my friends on the other side. Why hadn't they reacted to that? "What is it?" one of them answered. I whimpered in fear. "Dude, man up and tell us what that noise was," he said. "Picture," I said softly. My friend approached and picked up the camera. He looked at the picture. "Jesus," he yelled. "What is that?" We shushed him. I grabbed my camera, and as I did, I heard a soft whisper in my ear, as though someone was standing directly behind me. "Leave now," it said. The sound made my back seize up and my eyes widened. I started moving towards the stage. and felt my way towards the stairs on the side. I called to my friends. They were on their way. I was feeling along the wall to get back to the door at the back of the room. I pushed on the door, but it didn't budge. "What are you waiting for, man?" my friend said. "Open it." "I can't," I said. "It's locked." "What do you mean locked?" he demanded. He pushed on it. I immediately felt something brush by me. I thought it was my other friend. We heard the door open and pushed our way out. We immediately made for the stairs, throwing caution to the air. Suddenly the lights came on. We looked around to see what had turned them on, and our friend, the one whom I thought brushed by me, was walking out of the theater, eyes wide. "What just happened to us?" he asked. "If you're there, what did I feel?" "Who turned the lights on?" I asked. We exchanged looks. All of us were now wondering the same thing. We bolted up the stairs, causing a great deal of noise. It was now late enough for us to be a bit less cautious, as teachers who may have been working late had all gone home now, or had joined the party. We raced out of the school. We reached the bus stop down the street, and upon sitting down, let out a sigh of relief. None of us said a word as we rode down the street. When I reached my stop, I walked up the hill leading to my house. At this time of night, the forest on it was more intimidating, but there were lights illuminating the asphalt path that led up to it. I reached my house at the top of the hill and walked in. "Hey Jim, what are you doing back so early?" my dad asked. The party was boring, so I left." "You didn't leave alone, did you?" he asked. No. I left with my friends," I panted. "You're out of breath. Did you run up the hill or something?" "Oh, yeah. I'm trying to build up endurance for the mile run. You know that always sneaks up on you." "Okay then," he said, with suspicion in his eyes. I walked up the stairs to my room and cracked open a book. I read until about 9:30 when I decided to go to sleep. I had one of the worst nightmares, which is saying something, since my nightmares are always incredibly frightening. I remember waking up with the words, "He can't disturb us any longer," in my head. I ran to the toilet in the morning and threw up. I went about my morning ritual and made myself breakfast. The next day, I acted as though nothing happened. I was nervous every time I walked into that theater after that, but I never told anyone about what I felt. Now you know of that evening's events. Maybe now things will change for me. Maybe they'll leave me be at last.
Less Than Nothing, written by Cryptic Wander. The sun set quickly across the sky, casting a blood-red hue that only fall can give. The moon that rose in its place gave everything an otherworldly feel. Snaps of cold wind blew through the trees, shaking the dead leaves like a giant maraca. Skeletons, ghosts, and all sorts of creatures happily skipped through the streets, swinging their bags of candy without a care. James envied these children as they celebrated Halloween, full of excitement and wonder, as children should be. His son was not among them. "Soon," he whispered under his breath. He made his way toward the outskirts of town, passing by more children as they laughed and chattered. It served as a reminder of what he lost, stinging his heart again and again. Thankfully, they began to thin out as he approached his destination. The wrought iron gate came into view, growing taller as he came closer. With the light of the moon, He could make out the landscape beyond as if it were trying to hide from the world. It was a dreadful place, and silhouettes both short and long stood in odd intervals. Their imposing shadows stretched out across the grass, making him feel very unwelcome. As the moon climbed ever higher, he got to the cemetery gate. He could hear a dog barking off in the distance as he looked at the padlock that held fast a thick line of chain. It would be a sought-out destination for older kids in town this night, so he wasn't too surprised to find it locked. He hoped to God that there wouldn't be any here tonight. He needed to be alone, otherwise he might not have another chance. James made his way down the sidewalk trying to find another way in, the bars of the fence eventually turning into a wall of stone and mortar. It was still high, but he leapt up and was able to grab a hold of the top. James wasn't completely out of shape, but even still, he struggled to pull himself up. His feet scraped against the side and began to find purchase when he heard the excited talking coming a ways down the road. A group of teenagers were loudly going on about their evening as they made their way toward where he was. In a surge of desperation, he scraped the underside of his forearms as he finally made his way up and over the side. He landed hard on the ground, just missing a small marker that stood only a foot or two away from his head. He breathed a sigh of relief as the group of voices came and went, leaving James unnoticed. He got up, dusted himself off, and turned his gaze to the land of the dead. He knew the cemetery well enough, as it was only yesterday he said his goodbyes to his son at his funeral. At night, when the shadows took over, however, the entire place took on an alien appearance. The tree branches clacked together, adding to the odd sounds that rose in the distance. Cold fear coursed through him as he took in the view. Taking another deep breath, he steeled himself for what was to come. He had to get this done, and nothing was going to stop him. He faced forward with his mind on his task and walked between the stones as much confidence as he could muster. Eventually, he got his bearings when he saw the large paved road that had a shed at the turn. He made his way past and continued as the grade began to rise. Off in the distance, there came a sound, a clacking from the road ahead of him that was rapidly coming closer. He didn't have a weapon of any kind, and he braced himself to kick whatever it was. Then was surprised to find a large dog. It stopped a few feet away and gave a sad whimper. His heart nearly leapt out of his chest, and once again composed himself. "Psst! Get lost!" he whispered harshly. It gave him a sideways look and walked back toward the shack. James shook his head and continued on. Nearly at the crest of the hill, he looked off to the left and saw the large stone building his son lay in. He walked over to the stone steps, slowing down to get a grip on his thoughts and feelings. It was a moment of reverence as happy memories of his boy came to mind. Those feelings then soured, and tears began to fall from his cheeks. Those thoughts turned to the ruined remains he was forced to look up upon the day Nathan was found. His son walked home from school as he only lived 9 blocks away, when he never showed up. James called the police to report him missing, and it was a few days later that his body was found. It was stuffed behind some bricks at a construction site outside of town. He was clearly murdered, and he was so horribly mutilated that James couldn't clearly identify him without his dental records. Skin was slashed and torn, and his face had been caved in. Most likely from the large chunk of bloody concrete found close by. It was a closed casket funeral, and having lost his wife to an aneurysm 5 years prior, the attendance was small. It was at the funeral that the odd man approached him. He was dressed in a large gray coat, and a wide-brim hat sat atop a head full of gray hair. He seemed to keep to himself as Nathan's coffin was placed into his tomb. The entrance was sealed, and what few friends and family came began to shuffle out. Before long, it was just James and the man. James began to walk out as well, pulling out a pack of cigarettes to light one. He pat his pockets and sighed in annoyance that he had forgotten to bring a lighter. The man picked up on this and approached, handing him a book of matches. "I am truly sorry for your loss," he said. Lost in grief, James just gave a quick nod and thanked him as he sparked one of the sticks. Always sad when a father outlives his child, but it doesn't have to be that way. "Please, I don't know who you are, but can you just leave?" replied James. "In time, I shall. However, first I must insist that you hear me out. There is a way for your son to come back." James creased his eyebrows at this. Clearly, the man was insane, and his nonsense was quickly getting on his nerves. I think you better just go. Who are you anyway? What possible reason could you have for being at my son's funeral?" "Why, I am a friend, Mr. Monroe. You may call me Nick. I am offering you the chance of a lifetime. Tomorrow, it will be Halloween, and the veil between the living and the dead will be at its thinnest. This is the only chance you will have. The instructions are here on this card," Nick said, offering it to him between two gloved fingers. "Follow these instructions precisely, and you can have your boy back. And I do mean precisely." James looked the purple card over and scoffed, letting it drop to the stone steps of the mausoleum. "Again, I urge you, do them to the letter, or things could go horribly wrong. That is all, Mr. Monroe. Good day," said the man as he tipped his hat and walked off. James picked the card back up after he left. Of course, it was stupid, and entertaining the idea made him even angrier. As the day went by, however, he found himself fantasizing about its success while turning it over and over. What if, he wondered, he missed Nathan terribly and he would give anything to have him back? When Halloween came the following day, he felt he had no other choice. So, here he was, standing in front of the great stone building. The door was locked as well, but the chain was snapped easily enough, as it was no bigger than a necklace. He opened the door and almost lost his balance when he saw how dark it was inside. It was as if he opened a void that would swallow him up like he never existed. He took a breath and stepped inside, and each footstep echoed through the place of rest. Loud enough to wake the dead, he thought. He made his way toward the back where the light of the moon shone through the skylight above, and stood in front of the stone seal that had his son's name. After running a hand down the sand-blastered letters, he wrapped the tips of his fingers around the sides and began to pull. The ceiling putty hadn't yet hardened, and wouldn't for another few months. Even still, The airtight vacuum made it a slow task. His joints ached, but after a few minutes it slowly gave and the seal was broken. The slab fell to the floor with a resounding shatter of stone, and he looked into the dark tomb where Nathan's coffin sat. It was heavy, but he managed to pull it out with some effort and guided it to the top floor as gently as possible. After unsnapping the locks to the lid, he pulled it up, and there was the destroyed face of his son. The skin was glued back well as it could be. However, large amounts of bone still glistened through the moonlight. Tears formed once more, making it difficult to read. But he looked to the card and read the instructions once more. Number 1. Place 5 candles around the body in a star fashion and light them. Number 2. Anoint the head with oil. Number 3. Place your hand upon the chest and recite the words. It was a hard process for him, and the oil made Nathan's tattered skin come loose, and the feeling of it around his fingers made James queasy. Using the matches Nick provided him, he lit the candles one after the other and cleared his throat. As he began to speak, the door out front banged against the wall, making him jump. He looked to the left, not sure what to expect, and the dog from earlier made his way up to him. "Get!" he yelled, giving the dog a smack to the leg. It whimpered and strolled over to the corner where it curled up and sat. The eyes of the dog on him made him feel guilty, like he was some kind of monster. He put it out of his mind and continued his morbid task.
Permito legion accedere animam filimae, nemosit inter ilium et obscurum interfaciens.
The odd words rang throughout the empty building, and at first, nothing happened. James looked fearfully down at his son's dead body, both hoping it would and wouldn't rise. More silence filled the space, and he threw the card across the room. Disappointment and anger began to creep in. He was close to completely losing it when he heard a crackling sound. It was something like water when it rapidly froze. And then a violent explosion erupted in front of him, as if the air itself was ripped open, and a blue window to somewhere else was presented. Through the window he could make out a forest of dead-looking trees. And yes, the face of a child. It was Nathan. The air around him blew harshly as the tall figure walked in from the entrance. It was Nick from the funeral, still wearing his heavy coat and wide-brimmed hat. James couldn't see his face. As he squinted, Nick's deep voice boomed out. "Mr. Monroe, I must thank you for all your work." "What is this? How do I get my son out of there?" he yelled back. His face remained hidden, but his eyes began to glow bright red, that of an electric burner. The man walked forward and bent down to stroke what remained of the boy's cheek. Once more, he rose to his feet, then lifted a hand to the portal. "This is the gateway to purgatory. When a person dies, their soul goes here and is judged on its way to their final destination. Only a human is able to open the door." "So if I walk through there, I can get Nathan?" "Presumably, yes. However, you were never opening it for yourself, and I doubt you'd survive the terrors that call it home." "What do you mean?" "You should really brush up on your Latin, Mr. Monroe. What I mean is, without the guidance of God to protect you, the evil that dwells in purgatory's dark reaches will rip you apart and drag you to hell. Normally, a child this age is automatically brought to heaven's gate, and as the Bible says, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. However, when you read the words from that card, as his parent and guardian, you gave me full access to his soul. You son of a bitch! Who are you really? He began to chuckle, the tone rapidly dipping down multiple octaves. The coat he wore burst open, and the leathery wings spread out. The hat fell to the ground as the large horns of a ram pushed out of his skull and curved. His already large body seemed to double in size, and before him stood a demon whose appearance was straight out of a Renaissance painting. I couldn't have done it without you. I no longer have need of you, however, so you can join your son in everlasting torment, he growled. The demon made its way toward him on unnaturally long legs, and James had a thought. Can I at least enjoy one last smoke? He asked, pulling out his pack. The demon seemed to enjoy the triviality of it all and stopped. James lit up a match, then lit the rest of the book. The demon growled, but before he could pounce, James threw the flaming book onto his son's body, which quickly became engulfed in flames.
No!
It hissed, but it was too late, and the portal that was there began to vanish. James was able to catch one last glance of his son, and the demon was on him. It crushed his body with massive fists and ripped at his flesh with sharp claws. The dog that had taken its place in the corner got up and made a beeline for the demon, taking its forearm into its teeth. The demon threw the dog off with ease, and it landed on the other side of the portal. Blood was pouring out of James' body, but he just smiled through the pain, knowing his son would be okay.
Don't look so smug, you pig. I may not be able to take him, but he still has no protection. There are many others that will happily rip him to pieces again and again.
The light from his eyes faded, and James let out his final breath.
Very long, I apologize. I don't know how to be concise. Halloween night, several years ago, I was followed home by a stranger. I worked at a large mall about an hour away from home. The stores closed at 10 p.m, and the only bus home ran every hour and dropped me off 2/3 of the way. I would have to walk the rest. This usually happened between 11 to 1 a.m. at night, depending if I could get the store closed down on time, and if the bus wasn't too packed for me to get on. I am not a small woman. I'm fairly tall, and fairly round and not particularly attractive. My uniform was just a polo shirt and black trousers, flat shoes, all covered with a thick coat. I didn't see him get on the bus. To be fair, the bus was packed and noisy, and the walkways were crowded. I did my best to just block it all out with my headphones and staring out of the window. I'm not a people person, and having been at work for 12 hours on a busy day, surrounded by these same arseholes, I was just pissed off and desperate to get off the bus and be alone. When we finally got to my stop, and I managed to struggle my way to the front of the bus through the people that refused to move, I stumbled into the night air and breathed a sigh of relief. A couple of people got off the bus behind me, and I started up the hill, crossing the road to continue up the side street that led to my road. This side street is very long and has offshoots into residential streets on very steep hills going down. The street itself is lined with small shops, and there's a high grassy bank on the opposite side that has houses along the top, so it feels very isolated after the shops close. Very few people get off my bus stop at this time of night, and even fewer head in the same direction. Those that do cut off and go down one of these hills long before I get to the hill that leads up to my building. Now, the street isn't very well lit. The street lamps are few and far between. Several of them are motion activated, so don't even turn on until you're right on top of them. I've walked home in the dark this way 1,000 times, and I've walked to work this way at 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning 1,000 times too, for a different job. Whilst I enjoy the cool night air, I'm not afraid of the dark and love how bright the stars are where I live, I don't loiter. I walk fast so I can get home and shower ASAP. This night, I noticed someone walking behind me. I usually do because, like I stated above, very few people walk this way at this time of night. I was aware of him and waiting for him to turn down one of the side streets. He didn't. It felt a little weird, but I'm not the only person that lives in the area, so maybe he isn't regularly walking this way this time of night, so I've just never seen him before. I get to the medical surgery and car park at the bottom of my hill and cut across it as always. At this point, I know if he also heads up my hill, I need to worry a little more. This hill goes alongside the surgery, and there are high walls on my side of the street that block off the flats on the other side from my road. They can only be accessed from the road before mine. At the top of the hill, this wall ends and turns into an alley that runs parallel to my building. The opposite side of the road has multiple closed pubs, a closed corner store, and an old church that has been converted to a Muslim worship center, which is also closed. There are even less street lamps here, and my building is surrounded by a metal fence with 20 or so feet of grass that slopes down to the entrance of the building where the doorway is lit up. The point is, it's isolated, and the only reason someone should be up here this time of night is if they live in my building. This guy crosses the car park after me, and now I'm feeling concerned. I know he doesn't live in my building. There are 9 flats over 3 floors, and 10 people. I know all of them, and they know me. We would recognize each other, even in this darkness. So I walk faster up the hill, hoping to get to the building before he catches up. He starts walking faster too. I can hear him, gaining on me. And by the time I get to the gate, I know he's too close for me to be able to open the door and get inside before he's on me. The building is dark, and I know everyone is in bed, and it makes me feel all alone. And at this point, I'm shitting myself. So, thinking quickly, I cross the road and walk further up the hill behind the parked cars. I use the opportunity to swing my backpack off of one of my shoulders and grab my keys. I wait for him to follow me and get behind the cars too, so it will take just a little longer for him to be able to cross back over before I bolt across the road, throwing open the gate. I swing it hard behind me because he's now running at me, and I think it will either latch before he can catch it, or it will hit him. Either way, it will buy me a few seconds. I slide down the slope, barely staying on my feet because it's dangerously slippery when it's wet. I turn the corner at the bottom and slam my keycard on the reader, pressing hard on the heavy doors before it beeps, so it will open that much faster. The door is heavy and on a fire safety hinge that means I can't slam it or force it closed. The stairs are a couple of steps into the building and to the left. I live on the top floor. It's not a big building, 3 flats on each floor, 2 flights of stairs. It's also a concrete stairwell, so every little sound echoes and can be heard behind closed doors. I get inside the building and immediately bolt up the stairs. I'm only a few steps up when the door flies open behind me and this guy comes after me. Feeling a little more secure now that I'm in my building and only a few feet away from my neighbors, I spin around before he reaches me and slam my heavy backpack into him. He falls back into the landing and manages to catch himself by grabbing hold of the handrail. I scream, "What the fuck?" at the top of my lungs and hold my bag in front of me. Now that we're inside and the stairwell is lit by the motion-activated lights, I get my first proper look at him. He's a little taller than me. I'm 5'8". He's black and old enough to be graying. His clothes are weird, all made out of that weird waxy material some weatherproof jackets are. And he's wearing heavy boots. I don't recognize him at all, and he looks up at me with wide eyes as I stare down at him. I'm fully prepared to kick him in the face and throw my bag if I have to. I don't want him to be able to follow me into my flat, so I stare him down. He begins to stutter, hands wringing over the handrail and ducking his head a little, trying to look pathetic and harmless. He mutters something about visiting his son. Like I stated before, 9 people other than me live in this building. At that time, none of them were black, and none of them, other than myself, were young enough for him to be their parent. Even if his son did live here, how would he know to follow me off the bus to get to my building? Why did he follow me when I moved away from my building? And why did he chase me? He could have walked to the building and buzzed up to his son for him to let him in if it was true. I begin shouting at him to get out, repeating those 2 words over and over again, sprinkling in, "I don't know you," and "You don't live here." He continues muttering, making his excuses, but I shout over him. When I hear neighbors moving around and coming towards their doors, probably to look through their peepholes, I begin to back up the stairs. My neighbor, right at the bottom of the stairs behind the man, opens her door, leaving her chain on and peering through at us. She asks me if I'm okay and if she needs to call the police. The guy spins to stare at her, his hands out in a stop motion. And I hear another neighbor open his door behind the stairs, also on the ground floor. He calls out to ask if everything is okay too, and I just yell at both of them, "He followed me home. I don't know him. He won't leave." I'm now at the top of the first set of stairs, still looking down at him. My male neighbor starts yelling at him to get the fuck out, either more intimidated by the man than he was of me, or realizing he was outnumbered. He begins trying to open the front door. You have to press a button to get it to open, and he clearly doesn't know this. Further evidence he's never been here before. Feeling more secure now I'm not alone, and he's trying to leave. I bolt across the landing, up the final flight of stairs and get my door open before locking it behind me. I was dripping sweat and very close to a panic attack. I dragged my Hoover to the front door and propped it open, just in case someone tried to open my door. I would hear the Hoover fall. I didn't sleep very well at all, listening to every sound in the building, and luckily didn't have to work the next day. I woke up about 6 a.m. to a lot of sound in the building's landings. I could hear people opening every bin chute room and coming back out again. I peered through my peephole to see uniformed policemen searching the common areas of the building. I didn't call the police, but I assume one of the neighbors downstairs did. The bin rooms are fairly large, so I imagine they were checking to see if someone was hiding. I don't know for sure and didn't ask. Other than asking me if I was okay when we saw each other next, the neighbors that helped that night never said anything else about it. I don't know who he was or what he wanted. I've never seen him again, and I stopped working at that shopping center a couple of years later. I do feel guilty for not calling the police, just in case he had done this before or since, and the woman didn't manage to get away. But at the time, I just wanted to forget about it and move forward.
Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you can also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.